Hello and welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at the Paragon board, which is the progression you do after you finish getting up to level 50. And it actually has quite a bit of depth. So we're going to talk about the basics about the layout, how it functions, and just some tips and tricks for strategy on how to build out your boards. Because there are definitely some noob traps that people could easily fall into. So we're going to talk about that a little bit today. So this is a website. Feel free to use the URL. I'll put it up in the video description as well for you guys. It's very nice for planning. The nice thing about this one is it shows you like just at quick glance what these things are. So dexterity, strength, etc. Some of the other ones that are available don't necessarily have that, but they look more like what you would expect in the game. So if you go to like D4 builds and you look at their Paragon thing, this is actually what it looks like in the game. But it's a little bit harder to tell at quick glance what things are until you learn, what the symbols mean. So in the meantime, I'm gonna use this one. All right, so let's talk about how this works. Once you hit level 50, you're going to start leveling your Paragon tree after that point. You don't get any more talent point levels, you just get Paragon point levels. You get 4 Paragon point levels per level. So 4 points per level, basically. You can also get an additional 20 points through the Altars of Lilith within the game and Renown. I think it actually might just be Renown, not Altars of Lilith, but you can get an additional 20 either way. So 220 points total is what you're working with, because 50 levels times 4 is 200 plus 20 from Renown/Lilith, and there you go. Okay, so let's start talking about the layout of the board. The board is divided into some distinct sections. There are common nodes, magic nodes, rare nodes, glyph slots, and legendary nodes. So let's talk about what each of these is. So the common nodes obviously is more common statistics like strength, willpower, dexterity, etc. These are your basic core stats. If you don't know how the core stats work, I have a video on the channel as well. Feel free to check that out. It goes into some good detail about this. Each class has different bonuses from each stat. So what willpower does for rogue isn't what willpower does for druid, isn't what willpower does for a sorceress, for instance. So check that video out if you're not aware. But as far as the Paragon board goes, these common nodes are actually really important, because some of the other nodes, like the rare nodes and the glyph slots, have activation requirements. So as you're hovering over this, you can see it takes 200 strength to get this bonus stat. You still get the base stat either way, but if you get up to 200 strength, you get an additional bonus. So planning out your Paragon boards with that in mind can be helpful. It's not always strength. Sometimes it's things like willpower or dexterity, that kind of thing. Typically, most boards I found have 3 different stat requirements and one that's just kind of absent from the board. And that seems to line up pretty well with the different stat allocations for how classes get their extra bonus stats, because every class has one stat that doesn't give them a bonus. And that seems to be what lines up with the Paragon board, so you don't really have to worry about grabbing those stats necessarily on the Paragon board unless you want them for the other primary purpose. So for instance, barbarians get no benefit out of intellect other than the base level, which is some all resist that everybody gets. But for instance, sorcerers get all resist and damage. So it's different for each class. But on the barbarian board, you don't have to worry about activation requirements that are based around intellect. It's just dexterity, strength, and willpower. But there are definitely activation requirements for each. So keep that in mind as you're building through your common nodes. Sorry about that, had a momentary break. So like I said, you're going to want to keep that in mind for those common nodes. For magic nodes, you're going to want to just kind of pick whatever gives you the best bonus. But do note that some rare nodes will actually give you additional bonuses for the magic nodes, and some glyph slots will give you additional bonuses for those magic nodes. So for instance, let's see if we can find one here real quick. I'm going to pause the video. Oh, there's one right there. So for instance, you have this one here that says Paragon nodes within range gain 120% bonus to their physical damage and damage reduction modifiers. So anything within this purple square of the glyph, if it does damage modification, like this one, it gets more bonus if I slot that glyph in. There's also some specifically that say magic nodes gain additional XYZ potency kind of thing. So that is something to keep in mind as well as you're building these out, okay? All right. Each board has a predefined number of each type of node. So no board is imbalanced that it has more magic, more legendary, etc. They're all exactly the same. They all have one legendary node, one glyph node, 6 rare nodes, 30 magic nodes, and all the rest are common. The magic nodes always directly surround the rare nodes and are not anywhere else. So that is something to keep in mind as well. The glyph nodes are usually far away from the legendary nodes. So if you're going to path to both of them, you have to do a decent amount of stuff in between. Sometimes it's like up and around, sometimes it's diagonally across the board, you know. They're usually pretty spread out. Even this one, even though they look close, obviously you're gonna have to go all the way up and all the way around to get to it, right? So sometimes you might just want to do one or the other. Just kind of depends on your needs and your build, but that is something to keep in mind as well. Now, next up, something else you should know is that the starting board that you have does not have a legendary node. That's because they want to keep it relatively simple to start. You start down here, you work your way up. This is the barbarian one. In order to unlock your second board, you have to take an attachment gate. Once you grab that, it gives you 5 of every primary resource, and then you can choose what you want your next board to be. So let's say I'm trying to do a bleed build. Maybe I do blood rage, right? It's gonna give me bleed. But there are some extra things you're gonna want to consider as you're planning out your Paragon boards. It's not necessarily just grab what fits as the most powerful thing. Sometimes, depending on the situation, you're going to want to grab some of the less powerful ones early and then the more powerful ones later. The reason for this is the activation requirements that we talked about earlier on those rare nodes. They scale with each additional board you place. So right now, this one says, if I have 100 armor. Well, let's actually look at the next one because that's their starting one. This one says if I have 4%, bonus 4% life if requirements are met. If I have 200 strength plus 130 times the equip index. So in other words, if it is my second board, it's going to be 330, or it's going to be 130 times 2 is 260, right? 260 plus 200 is 460. So this one's going to require 460 strengths. Each additional board increases that strength requirement by 130 and that willpower requirement by 90. As such, ones with strength are not going to be as big of an issue for you on Barbarian because strength is your primary way of scaling damage and you're going to have lots and lots of strength, right? Willpower only gives you resource generation though. You're really only incentivized to grab that up to a certain point. You know, when you're able to keep your resources pretty constant, it's no longer an issue, you're going to stop grabbing willpower. So if you're looking at these boards, you might want to choose a board that you really want, but has willpower activation for some of the nodes you want. Maybe that legendary on that board isn't as strong, but the rares would require willpower to activate, and you want to make sure those get activated. So if you do that early, then the willpower requirement wouldn't be so late. If I were to grab this node as my 6th board, right? It's going to be 540 additional willpower. 540 minus 90, so it's going to be 450? Yeah, I did that right. 450 additional willpower. So if I grab this as my 6th board, I have to gain an additional 450 willpower versus if I grabbed it as my 2nd board. So there is some strategy involved with deciding what order you want to place your boards in. Ultimately, you're going to want to look at, what the legendary bonuses are, where the glyph slots are, and also, very importantly, what is it within radius of the glyphs? Because depending on what glyph you socket in there, you might get bonuses to certain magic or rare nodes. So you have to kind of take that into account as well. Okay. So if we're starting here on a Paragon starting board and we're pathing, you cannot path diagonally. You can only path up or sideways. There is no diagonal. Okay. So you got to path your way up. Once you get up here, you're going to be able to select your glyph. I'll just give you a quick preview of what some of them do for the barbarian. You can feel free to pause if you want. Here's the first page, second page, third page, fourth page, and that's it. So you can see there's quite a few different options that you can utilize, and depending on which one you choose, it might interact with the glyphs around it differently. So this one says Paragon nodes within range gain 120% bonus if they have physical damage modifiers or damage reduction modifiers. So this would be wasted if these nodes around it had nothing to do with physical damage and nothing to do with damage modification. In this case, they do. You got your damage modifications right there, right? But there is no damage reduction nodes. Those are sometimes on the boards. So here's damage reduction from vulnerable, damage to vulnerable, but these would be, you know, if you're vulnerable, you take less damage. If I slide that glyph here, these would get stronger, right? If I slide over here, I'm just getting bonus to damage, but not the damage reduction. So this would make more sense because this is going to have both. Okay, because this has damage to vulnerable as well as damage reduction from vulnerable. It just kind of depends on what you need for your build. But do take some time and kind of look around at what is in the node section before you select your board and select your glyph, because that is an important aspect of the strategy. Now, obviously, if you're just copying a build guide, cool, do that. But if you want to make your own builds, these are things you need to keep in mind. Diablo 4 seems to be a game where you can definitely make your own builds and still be successful, which is awesome. Or if you don't want to do that, you can follow a build guide and still be successful, which is also awesome. It's kind of a win-win. So I'm very happy with this system. I think it works out very well. Okay, final things to kind of note are legendary nodes are very powerful. They are game-changing in some ways, depending on the node. And they will kind of change how you're going to want to gear your character or what skills you're going to use, that kind of thing. For instance, this one is very useful with Whirlwind, right? Not really useful with anything else. So if I wasn't taking Whirlwind, I probably wouldn't take this legendary node, but I might still take the board if there are other things on there that I want, such as the yellows or the glyph slot has good things surrounding it, things like that. You don't always have to pick the board for the legendary. You don't have to take every legendary. Another thing to note is when you're assigning the board, you can rotate the orientation of it. So you can come in wherever you want. So if I were to come all the way up here and choose this gateway one, and then choose my attachment as whatever, it doesn't matter, Blood Rage, cool. It's there, but if I don't want it in that orientation, say I want to start at the top instead of at the bottom or on the sides, I can do that. I can rotate it before I put my first node in. So that is something that is within your power as well. Also to note is that these boards that are available to you per class are going to change every season. This will naturally add some build variety into the game and keep the game kind of fresh as we move through the different seasons. I think that's really cool. They've also talked about implementing new things on these boards over time, so that's something to kind of keep an eye out for as well. I think that about wraps it up. I just took a quick glance at my notes, and that's pretty much Paragon boards in a nutshell. Hopefully that makes sense to you guys. I know this was a little bit longer than my guides sometimes are, but hopefully it was enough no-nonsense information that you got something out of it. Make sure you like, favorite, share, subscribe, comment down below, and check back for more Diablo 4 content in the future. I used to make Diablo 3 content quite a bit, challenge rift guides and stuff. I was one of the main people for that before Rax created his YouTube channel. He started about the same time as I quit. I'm glad he's huge now. He's an awesome dude. I've talked with him a few times. He's way better at math and better at this game than I am, but I do make some pretty good informational guides. I have background in teaching, so I have that going for me. But if you guys feel like seeing more content like this, or even just let's plays or playthroughs, we do multiplayer plays with friends. I'm going to be streaming with some friends today. Subscribe to the channel, check back. Either way, thanks for taking time if you made it to this point. Appreciate you being here. You guys have a great rest of your day and enjoy the launch.